Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us to the speaker series hosted by the biology department here at STC. I want to remind you to like our YouTube page where you can find previous seminars that we have hosted. And I also want to announce that our next seminar will be in November 14th, and it will be on addiction. So if you like our page, you'll be able to see that one as well. Now today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Gavalda, and Dr. Juan Carlos Gavalda is a family physician who works with the Methodist Medical Group in the Dallas area of Texas. He has been practicing medicine since 2012. Although his love for basic science runs deep, he quickly discovered that it is in the non-science details of the practice of medicine that the true beauty of practicing medicine occurs. There is where his focus turned toward education, system building, operations, and medical billing. He has a mission to transform physicians' experience so they can fall in love with the art of practicing medicine again. And I have the pleasure to have here Dr. Gavalda, and I actually know him. He's a great person, and I am very excited that he agreed to join us today. Dr. Gavalda, the floor is yours.
It's wonderful to be with you today. Thank you, Dr. Forrest. I quite enjoy this. Like she said, one of my passions is education, and when they offered the opportunity to be with you and speak to you about monkeypox, we definitely say yes. I mean, we enjoy getting the message out, clearing the air, what's true, what's not, and getting into the community and explaining a couple of things. So we want to make this very interactive. So if you have any questions, please place it in the chat. And once we're done, we're going to try to answer as many as we can. Don't worry, we're not going to be talking here for an hour and a half. We really want to make it sure that we answer all your questions. So we're going to keep it to the essentials and get you all the information and then answer any question you have. So we're going to talk about monkeypox and whether this is the next pandemic, what's going on with monkeypox, what's all the rage with it, explain actually, first of all, what it is, right? And now that we know what it is, what can we do about it? And not only what's happening right now, but where we're going, right? Where we're going with monkeypox. So let's get straight to it. And first of all, let's talk for a simple thing about pox and monkeys. So what is monkeypox? Well, I want to explain this first of all. It's actually a virus. All right, so it's not a bacteria, it's not a fungus, it's not some microscopic thing that's running around. It's basically a virus. And when we talk about viruses, we have to keep in mind viruses are like bicycles in the sense that a bicycle is very easy to build and it's very easy to destroy, right? And that's what a virus is. It's actually the smallest living thing that we know of, right? That actually can invade our body and reproduce like crazy, like a bicycle, and actually cause certain effects in our body. So that's exactly what it is. It's not anything super special. It's just a virus that has been there a long time, but now has actually had an outbreak. And we're also going to talk basically about how it spreads, you know, the different ways that it spreads in our body. So all that's going to be covered. And we're also going to touch about why monkeys? What do monkeys have to do with monkeypox at all? And is it similar or different to smallpox and chickenpox, which are the other two famous pox viruses that we might state? So let's start with the basics, right? And when we talk about virus, we explain that virus is very simple. But what makes monkeypox so special? Well, in science, you have to get it into your head that we love making simple things complicated. And one of the things we use is actually big words. We love big, complicated, and exotic words. So when we talk about this kind of virus, we have to specify it's what's called a zoonotic disease. And we want to touch on this because zoonotic disease, and the first one you might say that's been very clear, right, is when we started with COVID, right? Oh, it comes from bats. Well, all right. Well, if that's the case, that is a zoonotic disease. Zoonotic disease is basically an animal illness that can spread or transfer to humans, right? So it's basically a disease that isn't necessarily ours, or it didn't originate in us, but can actually affect us, and it actually originates or comes from animals. And this is the case for monkeypox, right? So to make an example, imagine that your dog or your cat were to start sneezing, right? Like a common cold, right? And it starts with your dog or your cat, and then you actually get the cold as well, right? If we were to actually do certain experiments and check and make sure that where this actually comes from, and we say, actually, you have the same virus that your dog that was sneezing actually has, that would be a simple example of a zoonotic disease, right? So it came from your dog and it actually affected you. Now, this is the case here, right? Like we said, monkeypox is just a virus, nothing more, nothing less. It's not a plague. It's not, anything special. It's just a virus. And we have to keep that in mind, because no matter how much we hear on the news or what things happen, if we keep in mind the basics of what things are and how we actually can adapt or how we actually can deal with it, we'll be able to save a lot of anxiety, a lot of issues, a lot of spreading. And the other thing I want to let you know is that now we've advanced a whole lot in science, but the one thing that is very clear is that nature is king, right? Nature will always win. And when we talk about monkeypox specifically, humans actually have a lot to do with it as well. And this is why we talk about this, because when we talk about Isaac Newton, right, and the laws of motion, he has that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Well, if we were to correct that for nature, it's that every action has a consequence. And what I mean by this is part of the fact that we actually have monkeypox right now is because one thing that we did, which we all believe was the right thing, is that we were able to eradicate smallpox, right? And that's one of the things we want to touch on, right? The differentiations and the similarities between these two. So smallpox, it's a pox virus, just like monkeypox, but it is a much deadlier virus, right? That gave us a terrible infection, and people died from it in our history. It was terrible. And slowly humanity was able to understand the virus, actually create a vaccine, and actually be able to spread that vaccine throughout the whole world. And we were able to completely eradicate smallpox, which is an unbelievable feat, right? To think about that, you were able to eliminate a disease from the whole world is incredible. Now, why do we see this as consequences? Well, the good thing is we were able to eradicate smallpox and all the things that have happened, right, or in the past with this. Now, the bad thing is that because we eradicated it, we no longer get any smallpox vaccines, right? None of us that were born after the 70s, basically in the 80s or later, have ever gotten a smallpox vaccine, right? And the reason is because there's no need to, because there's no smallpox. Now, what is the consequence of that? Well, if you were exposed to smallpox or had a vaccine or some immunity to smallpox, then there's this beautiful thing that happens with your immune system that you can actually recognize smallpox, but you can also recognize certain similarities that smallpox has with monkeypox, which means that if you are exposed to monkeypox, if you actually get, you might say, infected, you have a much milder episode of monkeypox, or you don't even get it, right? Because you already have all this army, right? This military force in your body that already recognizes it. So when you actually get exposed to the virus, boom, you destroy it and it goes away, never happens anymore. So the fact that we no longer get exposed to smallpox, the fact that we no longer get vaccines to smallpox actually means that right now, when we talk about monkeypox, most of us don't have any army whatsoever for this pox virus, okay? Once again, it doesn't mean we want smallpox back in the world, but just that everything we do, whether good or bad, does have a consequence in nature, and this is an example of it. So now that we know what we're talking about here, how does actually this spread, right? And then we do want to talk about the first thing, right? So if it actually doesn't start in humans, then how do we even get it from animals? And this is by pure and simple exposure, right? So this is a virus that we can find in the body fluids or the saliva. So that means that if we're processing, if we're touching, if we're exposing ourselves to bodily fluids from the animal, or if the animal bites us, those are things that the virus can penetrate our skin or can enter our system, and now it can reproduce and actually infect us. We've also seen this in this case with uncooked meats, right? So when we're talking about the preparation of what's called bushmeat, right, which is raw or unprocessed meats, that means that that's not cooked, the virus is still alive, and you actually are able to get exposed as well. So those are the ways that the animal can actually transfer that over to us. Now, once it already has actually been in a human, like a human host, how can that human being transfer it to another, right? How can we pass it from one another? And we're going to talk about 4 different things here. And one of them is what we call the direct contact. So direct contact means literally there is direct contact. Your skin touches another person's skin directly. And that is when you touch infected sores, scabs, or body fluids of a person that actually has this virus. Now, the reason why we're reviewing all this is because later on, we're going to talk about how we can prevent it, how we can limit the spread. But it's very important. If you already know how it is spread, right, you can definitely make personal decisions that will limit your exposure and your risk. So that's direct contact, literally touching, exposing scabs, infectious sores, or body fluids. Now, there's also what's called indirect, right? Indirect means that you didn't touch the sore, you didn't touch that infected person, but you touched something that had touched them, right? So it's kind of like a third person or an intermediary. And when we look at that is basically if you're using clothing like towels, linens, things that have been exposed and that actually may have the virus, right? So if you rub a towel, right, or a gauze on that area that has the virus, and then I take that same thing and rub it on me. Obviously, this is not things you would do on purpose, but if you actually are living with someone or have a partner that has the virus and you use the same towels and things like that, or certain linens, you can actually get exposed indirectly that way. The third one, and this one, obviously, we've all, I think, heard about this, especially with the current pandemic that we have, it's what's called respiratory secretions, right? So in the monkeypox virus, it's not like COVID. We always like to make that a clarification. It's not that easy to get through COVID, but we have seen that since this is in the saliva as well, if you have prolonged, so we're talking about if you're talking, right, a long time, face to face, really close, there is a potential that when we talk, we actually secrete, right? And for lack of a better word, just spit, right? Just naturally. And if that actually goes and affects another person and gets into their body, they can actually get exposed as well. Once again, this isn't the most common way. This isn't as easy, but it is a possibility. Now, finally, a fourth one is what we call vertical. A vertical transmission actually means, from one body to another body that comes out, right? So we're talking about a mother that gives birth to a baby. this virus actually we know can cross the placenta, right? So we know that a mother that gets infected, actually this actually will go through the bloodstream, will cross, and will affect the baby. Now, this has led to miscarriages and other complications, but it is important to know that, this is not just, oh, it just affects me. No, no.
Okay, give us a few minutes while we get Dr. Gavalda back.
Okay, I apologize. Apparently the connection went away. I just want to double check.
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So the pop quiz question, yes, if it were discovered in cows, how would you call it? And if you guessed cowpox, you'd be 100% correct. Unfortunately, we already have a cowpox. And let me tell you a quick story about that so that you know that this isn't something that we've only been facing in the modern world, or that you think the world's coming to an end because of all these viruses and things. There's a beautiful story on cowpox, actually. Cowpox is a pox virus that only affects cows. And what they saw actually in ancient China is that the women who actually milked the cows did not get smallpox. They were immune from smallpox. And when their cows actually had cowpox, they had this minor, kind of like a cold symptoms, but they were fine. And they actually discovered that, or they made the association that since these women who milked cows that had cowpox, there must be some immunity. So one of the, well, actually, I think the first vaccines that we actually can discover in human history was basically the Chinese took the dry scabs that were formed in the cows and they actually made them into a powder. And when they made that into the powder, they would basically kind of tattoo, as if it was a tattoo, just stick it in to people. And that made them pretty much immune to smallpox. So what we're doing today is just way fancier. But obviously humanity has found ways of surviving everything we've been thrown at so far. So absolutely, this isn't something new, and this is why it's called monkeypox, because it was found literally in monkeys. But as we said cowpox, we said chickenpox, we said basically smallpox. So there are a lot of pox viruses, and what is the difference between them? Well, what we're seeing with the difference between them is actually that not only is it when these symptoms appear, but also how long they last, how dangerous they are, right? So when we talk about chickenpox, I mean, I had chickenpox. I think most of us have had chickenpox, especially before when we didn't have the vaccination. But death by chickenpox is extremely rare, right? It's caused by a different kind of virus, even though it has the same name with the pox. But it usually starts as a fever and an itchy rash, right? It's basically a chest, back, and face. And we have immunity for it, right? We actually do a vaccine called chickenpox vaccine. Now, the monkeypox is a little different. We do get that fever, but we also get like these whitish lesions, right? They look like a big, pus-filled cyst. And these boils are actually what looks like it, and that's pox. It usually happens in 5 to 21 days, although it can be sooner. and they do last a pretty long time. You know, we've actually seen 2 to 4 weeks worth. Now, the fatality, I'll be honest with you, it really depends where you are. In the United States, in the last outbreak, we've only had 1 death. It is extremely rare to die from this in the United States. When we go to other places around the world, that changes a little bit, right? So we're no longer talking about just, you know, a 1%. What we're looking at is a difference, right? We see up to 10%. Now, also, when we talk about smallpox, once again, smallpox is no longer something we fight. It's been completely eradicated, but it was extremely dangerous, right? And that's why so many efforts were put to eradicate it, and we saw up to 30%, you know, a death rate, right? And we know that these symptoms could last up to 5 weeks. So all those things are happening with different viruses, and this is how our body actually reacts to all of them. Now, also want to let you know that the second thing we want to discuss here today is how this affects us and how we can actually treat it. The reality we're facing today is that basically any disease that's found anywhere in the world is something that can affect us, right? We have to be very conscientious that as we have globalization, as the world opens up and we travel, which is fantastic, right? It also means that we have to open our minds to consider diseases that were rare in one area, but not in another, right? And this is the case of monkeypox as well. This isn't something new. We've been here before, and we'll touch on that. But it is something that has a global outreach, even though it didn't start globally. So basically, let's start with the basics. What symptoms are we having? Well, we'll divide that in what we call systemic, which is the whole body. And what we see is basically fever, headache, sore throat, myalgia, which is basically muscle pain or back pain, and fatigue. And those symptoms may last around 1 to 5 days on average. Now, the rash is different though. The rash, as you can see in the image, it really does look like a big zit, right? It's just like a dome, kind of whitish, full of pus. And that actually will crust over, right? It crusts over, it forms a crust, and it falls off by itself. You don't have to be scraping it or cutting it or anything like that. It will fall off. But that occurs usually either 1 to 2 days before you start getting the fever, the headache, the sore throat, the muscle pain, and the fatigue, or 3 to 4 days after. So a lot of times, and this is the challenging thing when we talk about medicine and finding these things, as you can see the systemic symptoms, almost any virus can cause that, right? When you feel, I feel like a headache, I feel fatigued, you know, I got a sore throat. Well, that can be from allergies to bacteria to tonsillitis to, you know, fever, you know, all these things can cause it. So it's extremely important a lot of times to just keep a close eye when we're talking to patients and basically say, hey, it does look like just the general virus, but I want you to be very conscientious. If you develop any rashes, if anything changes, let me know immediately, right? And this is the case of monkeypox as well. The rash comes a little bit later. If you haven't seen it before, it'll come 3 or 4 days after the symptoms stop. When the symptoms are actually getting better, boom, you get a rash. That's very, very typical. And we know that this rash will not go away from one day to another, right? It can last 2 to 4 weeks, as we mentioned. So all this is going on in a person who has monkeypox. And the question we might think is, okay, well, if we know all this, well, how do we actually treat it? And I do want to get a couple of things clear. One, no matter what the internet says, right? There is no specific treatment for monkeypox, right? There's no pill you can take that's been specifically designed to eradicate monkeypox or to cure you from monkeypox once you have that disease, that virus. I will let you know there is a medication that we use, right? And we don't use it on everyone, but there is a treatment option called TPOXX. This is actually an antiviral drug. And I want to explain antiviral because a lot of times we get this confused. Antivirals are not antibacterial or antibiotics, right? So if you take Augmentin, Cipro, Macrobid, any of these antibiotics that you can think of, amoxicillin, that works by not allowing bacteria to reproduce. But it does absolutely nothing for viruses, right? And an antiviral helps you decrease the reproduction of viruses, but it will do nothing for bacteria, right? So it is, because we get that quite a bit in the office with all our patients, right? Every drug has a purpose. And in this case, TPOXX was actually used for smallpox. And what we saw was, because of the connection, right, that these two viruses have, and because they have certain similarities, this is a medication that has actually seen benefit when we treat for monkeypox. Now, it is not approved, right? And that's why we say there's no specific treatment. So this is something that we do see, but it hasn't received tons of studies that we can say, oh, definitely, this is what you got to do, because we've tested it on, 20,000 people and we know it works. So when we talk about treatment, it's very important. Please do not home remedy this. We're going to learn a lot of reasons why and why it's important to control the spread. If you actually have symptoms, whether they are the first symptoms that we talked about, right, before the rash, or you see someone that you love or someone you're close to with that rash, or you have that rash, definitely this is something you want to talk to your doctor about, right? And receive treatment if necessary. And I say that because all medication does have side effects, right? The reason we know these side effects is because medication goes through an incredible amount of research before any of the medications are approved, right? So I know a lot of times medications get a bad reputation and we're like, well, yeah, you can take cinnamon for this, or you can use it. Yeah, natural remedies. Yeah, some of them actually work because they've been proven to work, but most of them, there's no data out there. So if we did actually do the research for it, we would find all the side effects as well, right? So we definitely want people using the medication that they should be using, that is not going to cause any side effects or limited. But any medication, always like to specify, there is no medication that's for everyone, right? Even over-the-counter medications do give clear warnings that this should not be used in special cases. So even if you have access to this medication, because when we talk about real life, we know patients have access to medications without their doctor on occasion. Even if you have access, do not doctor it yourself. Do not home remedy it. Talk to a professional that you trust. Get the facts, get the evaluation, and definitely, if you qualify, let's get you treatment. And having said that, the opposite is also true, right? There's no need to be a martyr, right? The rash, the patients describe it as horrible, right? A burning, like this constant, agony that they're in. Do not be a martyr, please, right? We want to treat the symptoms. We want you to feel better. We want to limit the spread, but we definitely want you to actually feel as the best you can during this syndrome that you're having, right? So don't be a martyr. Call your doctor that you trust. Explain the situation, get an evaluation, and definitely get help. Now, the key that we do have, just like smallpox, is actually vaccination. Vaccination is the key. If we can prevent this, we definitely want to. Okay, and we actually have a vaccine that's approved for not only smallpox, but for monkeypox, is the Genuous. And this is actually being used right now in the United States and different parts of the world. It's a two-part series. And I always like to explain that, because if you got one shot, you're not immune, right? When we say two-part series, is you actually need both sides, right? Both injections to give you the immunity that this vaccine states it can give, right? And we consider it that you are immune around 14 days after that second vaccination. Now, let me just stop there, because I know there's a lot of issues on vaccinations and a lot of politics. In science, there is no issue on vaccination, right? You know, we do experiments and we basically say, if I do A, will B stop? And the answer is yes, we know, right? Okay, well, this is the case here, right? We know that if you get vaccinated, the risk of actually you getting infected by monkeypox is extremely low. So this is something that we definitely want people to do, especially if you are going to be involved in any sexual activity or involved in multiple sexual partners, if you are going to be exposed in any way, if you're going on foreign travel to high risk areas, anything that increases your chances of getting monkeypox, well, the vaccine will help lower that chance of actually developing the disease, even if you are exposed. I want you to keep in mind the QR code that we put here, that if you actually go there, it will show you where you can actually get the vaccine. There are limited amounts depending on the geographical area. So I wanted to give that out there. So it's a resource that you can just snap it and, you know, put your basically your area code and it will show you where you can get it. Because to be quite honest, most doctors' office don't carry the vaccine, right? We don't stock up on monkeypox and we don't have the resources to it. So chances are that your local doctor won't have this vaccine. So I wanted to give you access, quick access of actually finding a way where you can get this taken care of. Now, having said all that, let's talk about where we are today, right? And where we're going, what's going on, what's the plan? Like I said, this isn't something new. Monkeypox was actually discovered in the 1950s in Denmark, like we said, in monkeys, right? And we know that we have registered deaths, right? People actually dying from monkeypox since the 1970s. And this was actually in Congo and it's continued in other areas of Africa. Like I said, this new outbreak, we've only had one death in the United States, which is extremely, extremely low considering the cases we've had, and we'll touch on that later on. And we've been here before, right? This isn't something new. We actually had an outbreak in 2003. So we're talking about 20 years ago, we actually had an outbreak in the United States of monkeypox as well. So after 20 years, here we are again. And when we talk about here we are, let's go through the things that have happened. We actually saw a first case was actually May 2022, and that was in the United Kingdom. Now, we declared, or the World Health Organization declared this as a public health emergency because of the outbreak basically a month later, right? And we're going to touch on that later on, why it spread so quickly in the beginning. So we're talking about May, we're in September right now, right? So this is actually fairly recent. Now, in August, we already started the vaccinations in the United States. So when this actually came, it was actually pretty quick, the reaction, much better than COVID, I can tell you that. And we actually started vaccinating immediately to high-risk individuals. And we actually hit a peak of 400 cases per day, a little bit more than 400 cases per day for a couple of weeks in that month of August, right? So as soon as, you know, this was climbing up, vaccination started, and we were actually starting to get people vaccinated. Now, luckily, that was last month, right? August. So what we're seeing is that, unfortunately, we did have our first death in September 13th. It was a patient that was immunocompromised, basically had a weak immune system, but it's been the only case so far. And ever since September, actually, our numbers have gone down. So right now, we're no longer seeing 400, we're no longer seeing 300, we're no longer seeing 200 cases per day. We're actually seeing less than 200 cases per day. So this answers our questions, right? Is this the new pandemic? Well, it doesn't look like it, right? We're actually, could we be doing better? Absolutely. Could we have more support? Absolutely. But are we handling this much better than the previous pandemic? Absolutely, right? Where we're at now is much better than where we are a month ago. And we know that so far we have 25,341 as of September 20 cases that have been confirmed. right? So if you consider the population of the United States, which is over 300 million, it's relatively low. However, any patient who have actually had monkeypox will tell you, I don't care how much the population is, when you have it, it's a whole different story. So that's why we definitely want to continue to spread the word, to educate, to prevent, to vaccinate, to get the word out so that we can actually stop this from spreading. So how do we actually stop it from spreading? There's tons of things we can do. And I'm sure with you knowing now how it spreads, you can think of similar things that you can do actually in your everyday life that can help limit the spread. The first thing is, if you actually see the rash, right? If you have the rash, you need to isolate. Remember how it spreads, right? Direct and indirect contact. So when we talk about isolate, it's you alone, right? So it's not like, oh, I'm going to isolate with my partner and then, have sex or keep on touching, because then your partner is going to get it, right? So when we talk about isolation, it's isolate as much as you can until the rash is basically over. And why until the rash is over? Because when we go back to when we said how it spreads, it's actually the scabs. That's where the virus is most present. So we want to limit that contact. Also, we know that we did mention clothing, we mentioned towels, linen. So if you have furniture that's shared, that it is impossible, right? So we don't want you buying a whole new furniture for your room just for 2 weeks, right? That'd be ridiculous for the human population. If there's furniture that cannot be washed, right, then it's important to cover it, right? And that will limit so that the virus actually doesn't get in contact. And just a quick question, if somebody with monkeypox actually were to sit down in some furniture and then somebody else sit down immediately after and get exposed, would that be vertical? Would that be direct? Would that be indirect? What kind of transmission would it be? So if you know the answer, put it in the chat as well. And if you did, the answer would be indirect, right? So it's using that third key. And so that's why you want to cover that furniture if you can. Always definitely use a separate bathrooms. We know you take a bath and you wash your teeth, you go to the toilet. So there's huge areas of exposure when we talk about the bathroom. And whether it's the bathroom, the kitchen, or any other place, we know that it can spread through contact. There's a lot of stuff we still don't know how long it lives on certain surfaces, but we want to clean all shared surfaces to make sure that the area is clear and we don't spread it indirectly. Once again, if you use public transport, don't spread it directly or indirectly. That's part we know about the isolation. But in cases where it is impossible to isolate, or let's say you're actually going to your doctor's office, right? Well, unless you live really close by and you can walk, you do have to get some sort of transportation. So we want you to get, if you're going to use public transportation or an Uber or anything like that, we want you to always cover up the lesions, keep the distance appropriate, don't have any exposed surfaces. And when we talk about working, if you're able to work from home, then that is what you want to do, right? And I think that that's changed a lot ever since COVID, right? People tend to be much more open to having employees work from home. So talk to your doctor if you need excuses, if you need FMLA, if you need short-term disability, whatever you need, talk to your doctor, your health professional. Make sure you get all the services you need, because we want you to be healthy, but we want the people around you to be healthy as well. We did mention the isolation, and we have it twice because it is extremely important to keep in mind this is not like COVID, right? There's not like, oh, 5 days are over, I'm done, I feel great, my fever is gone, let me go back to work. No, that's not the case. That's why we have it twice. You need to isolate until the rash has healed completely. And once again, keep away from your pets if possible. This is not something we immediately think of, but remember, this is a zoonotic disease, right? It comes from animals. Now, which animals? That's up for debate. We believe it's more rodents, right? And we believe that monkeys and humans and primates in general are just the host of the virus. We're not the originators. We believe rodents are, but keep away from your pets. Your pets can actually, some of your pets can get exposure to monkeypox. Now, we did say that in certain cases you are just simply not able to isolate, right? So in those cases, definitely, let's limit the risk. Let's keep everything we can covered, right? So yourself, if you have it, cover yourself, right? Cover any exposed areas. You can use gauzes, you can use bandages. We just want to make sure you don't have any exposure. We want you to keep a safe distance. Remember, it's very rare, but if you do have prolonged contact face to face, you can spread this. And like we said several times, do not share towels or clothing with each other. Now, we have all this information, and still when you go on the internet, still when you hear people talking on the street, there's still a lot of confusion. So I want to just clear the clutter of information here with a couple of things, and then we'll be closing with that because I'm anxious to get to your questions. I know there's been comments, and this is even by politicians, unfortunately, that this outbreak is a homosexual outbreak, right? That is believed. And that's because what we saw was, in this case, some of the first cases that we saw were actually traced back to an international pride event in Gran Canaria in Spain. Now, let me be clear, monkeypox is a virus. We said it 1,000 times. Viruses do not discriminate, right? They are just viruses. This is not a gay disease, it is a people disease. And actually, the only monkeypox patients we've had in our office were not, homosexuals, they were heterosexuals. So I don't want to give that message. I know there's been some information set out. This is not related only to homosexuals or gay activity or anything like this. The human disease, it affects all humans. Now, second thing we want to point out is that if you're old enough to be vaccinated against smallpox, basically, then you do have protection, but we don't know how long. We have had sporadic cases of people who have actually been vaccinated against smallpox that did develop monkeypox. It is rare, but I don't want you to be overconfident. And if you are in that range where, oh, I had that smallpox vaccination, 40, 50 years ago, I'm good to go. I can do anything I want. Well, no, that's not the case, right? It may be that you are no longer immune. So don't get overconfident or cocky when it comes to that. I will let you know that most patients, they will develop symptoms, right? It isn't that common to develop asymptomatic infections. Now, let me touch on this because this is something we've lived through COVID, right? What is an asymptomatic infection? Infections that are asymptomatic basically means that you are a carrier of the virus and you are able to spread it to other people, but you haven't had a reaction in your body that has produced symptoms. So it's basically your body's fighting the battle. It's okay, right? You're not getting any symptoms, but you do carry the virus and you are able to actually spread the virus. One of the first times we saw this, right, a little bit of history there was over 100 years ago when we talk about the Spanish flu. Now, when we mentioned the Spanish flu, there were areas around the world, basically hit the whole world, and there were areas that were isolated that still got it. And the reason why they got it was because the merchants that would go, and there were very limited merchants, they were asymptomatic carriers. They actually were infected, didn't know that, didn't have any symptoms, and were able to go to these areas to take merchandise or take resources to the areas that basically were either isolated or chose to be isolated. And they actually passed the virus through, right? So that was an asymptomatic infection being spread. So in monkeypox, it's rare, but it can happen. And I know I mentioned this, but please, please, please do not home remedy this, right? If you put Clorox on it, I mean, we've heard it all. Windex, Vicks, Clorox, vinegar, aspirin, you put garlic on it, No, please do not, right? It's gonna make it worse. You can actually develop chemical burns on your skin with these chemicals. And those, a lot of times, do more damage than actually just letting it scab over, letting it fall off, and letting your skin heal properly. Finally, I do want to let you know there's no prophylaxis, right? And what we mean with that is if you are exposed, there's no like treatment that we give just, oh my God, you were exposed, boom, take this so you don't get it. No, that's not proper medicine in this case. There's no treatment for that. What we do is actually monitor. We just keep an eye on you to see if you develop symptoms or not. It doesn't mean that if you are exposed 100% sure you are going to get the virus. There is a chance. Unfortunately, that data is, we don't have clear data on what's your risk, right? We can't say like 40% are going to get it or anything like that. We still have that. But there are certain things that we can do to help limit the actual risk of getting this, right? And prevention is clear here, right? So first of all, we already mentioned it, but if you can get vaccinated, definitely do. We also want to avoid risky activity. So even if you had vaccine for the next 2 weeks, please avoid risky activities, right? Do not go to areas that are exposed. Do not be with multiple gatherings that are high risk. If you're going to engage in sexual activity, please limit sexual partners. Always wash any sex toys, gears, wash your hands, keep everything clear. And it may seem silly, but you'd be surprised. Always look, right? Before you actually have sex, look where you're going to be putting your body into, right? We want to make sure that there are no rushes, no cuts, anything that can trigger. And if that's the case, always use protection or try other methods of sexual pleasure. So always keep safe. So that's the general gist of what monkeypox is, and I'm hoping it's answered a lot of your questions, but I really want to get down to your questions. So if it's okay with you, we're going to end it there, and I just want to hear from you and answer any questions you got.
Okay. Thank you so much. We've had a lot of questions.
Okay.
But a lot of the questions we actually filtered a bit because you've answered them.
Okay, that's good.
Because a lot of people were confused between the smallpox, chickenpox. So at least our community and our students now have a better idea. So some of the interesting questions, more than one student actually, or more than one participant actually talked about and asked. I have one here, but I know I saw another question. And this one's from William. He's asking if there is, and I think you mentioned a little bit, but are you more at risk of developing severe symptoms if you have any immunocompromised, elderly, if you have diabetes, any condition that, and these questions are coming because we just went through COVID and we have seen how there's a population that is at higher risk. So more than one person is asking, is there a population that is at higher risk, like certain conditions that make you at a higher risk of developing severe symptoms?
Wonderful. That's a wonderful question, William. Congratulations, because it's extremely important, right? So yes, let's touch on that. First of all, just to make sure we're all on the same page, I just want to explain what immunocompromised actually means, right? So if you think of your immune system is like the Army, Navy, Air Force, and I guess now Space Force of your body, right? One attacks by land, one by sea, one by air, one by space. Well, that's exactly what happens in your body. One attacks bacteria, one attacks viruses, one attacks parasites. So we have this huge army that is specifically designed for different things that can affect us. So when you are immunocompromised, it means that that army is actually affected and not able to work at 100%. Now, excellent question, because this is something that we see more and more and more because we are living longer, but unfortunately, our horrible American diet and our lack of exercise means that we are getting chronic diseases early, right? So we have more and more immunocompromised people in our society every day. And the answer to your question is yes, right? So to make it clear is, if you imagine a country with an army that gets invaded, right? And let's say 5 different countries get invaded by this massive army, which is the most likely to fight that invasion and keep the invaders out? Well, it's the one with the most, probably not only the biggest, but the best, right? So it's not only, how big is your army, but if your army, they basically, instead of water, drink beer all day, they're most probably going to shoot themselves instead of shooting the enemy, right? So that's what happens when we talk about immunocompromised. Some people actually have a small army. Those are patients that may be on chemotherapy due to cancer, maybe on chronic steroids, right? So if you have rheumatoid arthritis or any of these conditions that are treated with steroid, or I'm sure we all have seen these commercials, right, on TV about medication that says, talk to your doctor, because if you have tuberculosis, you can die, or something like that, right? So any of these medications that actually decrease your army size, that counts as immunocompromised, which means you are having a difficult time to fight off that virus. If your army also has outdated weapons, right? So if you're fighting bow and arrow against machine guns, chances are, even if you outnumber the enemy 5-1, you most probably are still going to lose a battle. So that happens in patients who actually have problems with their immune system, right? Which is basically, they just don't have the resources to create new army or to fight this battle. And that tends to happen with the elderly. Immunocompromised also can mean that you actually have a problem where that virus hits. So Dr. Forrest mentioned COVID. So we know that COVID hits lungs. People who have lung disease already are at higher risk, right? So that's the case in everything, right? If you have a condition that unfortunately is where this virus hits, then yes, you're at exposed risk. I can tell you, we've actually had patients, and one of our worst ones that actually ended up in the hospital was a diabetic. So diabetes also counts as being immunocompromised. We know that in diabetics, their immune system is not working at 100%, which means you do not fight infections off like a non-diabetic will. And that's the situation we've had, right? Where we had people who have had their blood sugar in 400, 500, which is completely out of control, get a worse monkeypox than people who have normal blood sugar. So excellent question, William. Absolutely. If you are immunocompromised or taking any medication that can cause your defenses to weaken, or you are elderly, absolutely, any of these things can definitely cause you to have a worse outcome. Thankfully, even if you do have a worse outcome, the mortality rate in the United States, like we said, we only had 1 death so far, is still extremely low, but that's not the case all around the world, right? And that's very important to mention as well.
So going within that same line, Mary Lou actually asked, so if you either take the vaccine or are on the antiviral medication, if you need to discontinue any medication or monitor any other of these conditions, and she mentions like kidney function, for example.
Perfect, absolutely. So you said Marilu, Marianne?
Marilu
Marilu.
Contreras, yes.
Okay, Marilu Contreras. Well, excellent question. Absolutely. That's exactly why we say do not home remedy this, right? When we talk about TBOXS, that's a medication that does have side effects. It can interact with other medications. So it's very, very important, first of all, that if you are going to use this medication, you need to have a medical evaluation where a professional sits down and says, hey, with this medication and this medication, this will interact. So please do not use it. Or, hey, you're having a mild case. We don't recommend it because the side effects are much worse than the disease in your case. Or when we talk about the vaccination, we know that the vaccine is safe to use with other vaccines, but the one we definitely do not recommend it with, and the reason is because there is no data, right, is the COVID one. So COVID vaccine is relatively new, and monkeypox just became an issue that we're addressing, you might say. So we don't have a lot of studies on, hey, when we actually get both vaccines at the same time, can we confirm that both will be affected, right? So we know you can get COVID and flu shots. We know you can get COVID and pneumonia shots. This has been studied. But the one we recommend you do not use in combination is if you're going to get, the monkeypox vaccine and COVID, please get them separately. Allow proper vaccination time. So we mentioned it's 2 doses, and it's 2 weeks after that second dose that we would say you're immune. So if you are going to get that COVID shot, make sure you get it either before, right, 2 weeks before, or 2 weeks after you get that second shot. Very important. Having one shot, I know I'm repeating myself, but having one shot does not mean you have the vaccine. You need both shots and then 2 weeks after. So thank you very much, Marilu. Yeah, great question.
So now that you mentioned that, we actually had a question of, so since it's 2 doses, Elias asked, can you get the second dose if you have COVID or the flu? And how long, if anything, you have to wait?
Well, yes and no. We don't have that many cases of people who've actually had COVID or flu go through clinical trials, right? So in an emergency situation, the answer would be yes, we risk it. Having said that, there are very to be taken care of.
I'm sorry, Dr. Gavarda, we lost you for maybe 15 seconds, 20 seconds.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. We can hear you now. Can you repeat the last part?
So where did you leave me? I'm so sorry.
Almost at the beginning.
Okay. So we'll say, don't worry. So basically, yes and no, right? In an emergency situation, yes, you can, but the reality is there are no emergencies, right? If you have COVID, if you have the flu, if you have pneumonia, you're isolated, you're in a hospital, or you shouldn't be going out. We can wait, right? And we can wait until you're better and then get the vaccine. We also know that there's a time period, right? There's a month. So from the first shot, you can get it within a month and it's still considered acceptable time. So let's say you got the vaccine, let's say you had a soreness, muscle soreness, and you're like, you know what, that's just a reaction of the vaccine. It happens with all vaccines. I won't worry, but you actually start getting worse. We test you test positive for COVID. No problem. We wait, right, until you're better. And between that time period, before that month is out, we actually give you that second vaccine, that second dose. Having said that, it's very important that, hey, if you have this dose and your next dose is in 2 weeks, please don't miss that appointment, right? Because we don't know if you're going to get sick later on. So we want to make sure you get vaccinated. So yes, you could in an emergency, but no, honestly, there's no real emergencies in this case. And we don't have any data, as you can imagine, of people who've had flu or COVID or anything and go to get the vaccine in the trials, right? Because usually those people are weeded out, right? We kind of want to make sure that we have correct data without any of these interactions. So that's a fantastic question. There's not that much clinical data on it, but yes, we do want you to get it, but preferably when you're not sick. Absolutely.
Okay, so we have some questions, and I know it's because chicken pox can stay dormant or stays dormant in the body and can later manifest
Okay.
as shingles. So we have some questions on, and I know you talked about that that example of having cowpox and having some immunity, but so a few students actually are asking if you can, if you had or get monkeypox, can it stay dormant in your body, or can you get it again in a different way?
Right.
And comparing to obviously to chickenpox.
Chickenpox and zoster, right? Shingles. Okay, so no problem with that. We'll divide them. First of all, when we talk about chickenpox, you're absolutely right. Now, the key difference is there are two different viruses, right? When we talk about chickenpox, we're talking about varicella zoster virus. Now, that virus, that virus, it's one talk about survival. That virus is a smart one. So what it does, it actually, when you get chickenpox, that virus doesn't really go away. It kind of stays in our body, kind of like herpes and all that. Some of these viruses really are able to survive anything, and it stays actually in our nerve. When the beginnings of the nerve, as it leaves that spinal cord, there's this little round nodule, you might say, and that's where it stays. And you're absolutely right. It stays dormant. Dormant means that you haven't gotten rid of it, but it's kind of sleeping. As long as it doesn't wake up, you don't have any problems. So for example, I had chickenpox when I was little. So which means I can get shingles at any time. Thank God I haven't had shingles, but I can, right? Because I know I have that virus in my body. And when you actually get stressed or your immune system decreases, boom, that virus now is ready to reproduce, because you might say it knows your defenses are down and your defenses can't attack it, and it reproduces. So that's the difference on that virus compared to the monkeypox. The monkeypox virus is a little different, right? It doesn't have that ability. But to answer your question, can you get it again? The answer is yes, if you get reinfected. Now, having said that, here's where the gray area, unfortunately, a lot of these things, when you think about diseases in the human body, well, before we can get you the information that can you get this again in your lifetime, technically, a lifetime has to occur, right? Because if you got infected when you're 20 and everybody got infected very young, and they die at 90, and none of them had they got the virus again, had symptoms, even though they were exposed, then we can definitely say, oh, this is lifetime immunity. But so much time has to go in between, right, that it is impossible for us to tell you a lot of times whether this is something lifelong immunity or not, right? We don't suspect it will be, because we know that that's the case with when we talk about smallpox vaccination, right? You were vaccinated, but you can get monkeypox, right? So we know it doesn't stay with you like the shingles virus, right? Where you had chickenpox and then it comes out like something else, like shingles, because it's right. So it's like a chickenpox on the nerve, you might say. But whether you can get lifelong immunity, I'm sorry to say, we don't know, right? You could get it again, but getting vaccinated, we can't confirm that it's going to be for the rest of your life. Monkeypox is out of the picture.
Okay, I think a lot of the faculty are kind of excited, and probably a lot of these things I discussed with my students, and I hope they're like, oh, okay, now I understand a lot of the details. So I bet that all my colleagues are like, oh, definitely next week we're going to talk about a couple of these things.
It is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, biology is incredible.
So there's some interesting questions that I have here, a little bit isolated, but I found them very interesting. So I have Loida asking that you mentioned that monkeypox can be transmitted through the placenta.
Yes.
She's asking, would it be fatal for a fetus?
Yes, fantastic, Loida. Great question. What we've seen so far is it depends. Unfortunately, a lot of things in medicine, it depends. Now, the short answer is yes. A lot of times it is fatal. Women who actually have been exposed or have had monkeypox, especially in the first trimester, will develop a miscarriage. Right. So to answer your question, yes, it depends on what stage. So, for example, if you get monkeypox and you literally are going to give birth, a week later, then no, right? But the most common thing that we usually see is miscarriage. So yes, it is fatal to most fetuses. We can agree on that. It's fatal to most fetuses, especially if you get it early in the actual pregnancy. Yeah.
Okay, so I found this interesting. Giovanna is asking that as a community with a high resistance for antibiotics, for example, penicillin, since penicillin is commonly used to stop skin infection, how will this impact individuals with high resistance?
Okay, fantastic. So that is extremely important because it touches on what we mentioned, right? Just like your immune system, like we said, there's the Army, Navy, Air Force, right, and Space Force. Well, you have parts of your immune system that work with bacteria, parts with viruses, parts with fungal, parts with allergies, parts with parasites. Medication is the same way, right? So we are not trying to throw shade on what we know happens in the community, right? We know there are places, even in the United States, where you can just go around the corner and you'll get penicillin, right? We know antibiotics are not always given by doctors. And I have patients that come to me all the time and you ask, oh, what have you taken? Oh, well, I took ampicillin because I wasn't getting better. And we're like, well, how did you get that? Oh, I got it over there. Okay, Now, I say that because in this case, we're in luck because we see a lot of abuse of antibiotics. But we have to keep in mind and we have to spread to the community the knowledge that monkeypox is not a bacteria, right? It is a virus. So medication like antibiotics that are great for bacteria basically do practically zero for viruses. So we don't suspect that there's a high resistance, or you might say the virus is immune to the medication, because first of all, the medication is rare. It's not a medication that is highly available. It's not used quite a bit because, as we said, this was developed for smallpox, and that's been out of the world for several decades. So we don't suspect there's an innate virus immunity to this. So that's the first thing. And second, even if the person has had multiple exposures to antibiotics, then because this is a virus, then we know that that won't affect. Now, having said that, absolutely, in our community, we do have some resistance, and people may suspect that, oh, this is just another skin infection. Let me take amoxil, let me take ampicillin or something like that. But you guys know better, right? You guys already know what's caused by, you already know how it looks. And if you're ever asked, you can definitely say, that looks something different. I can't confirm it, but please talk to your doctor, right? So to answer your question, we don't suspect that abuse of antibiotics in our society is going to cause an issue here because, first of all, this is a virus. And second, the medication, the treatment is not readily available for everyone and hasn't been used consistently in our community. So there shouldn't be any resistance to it. But fantastic question.
So actually, before I build on that question, Loida actually commented to thank you so much for answering her question.
My pleasure.
So building on that question, we had some questions about treating the lesions. So are the lesions individually treated? And some mentioned the calamine, which is actually used for the other virus. But are the lesions treated or are just monitored?
Right. So absolutely, we treat the symptoms. So, for example, if you do have the lesions, a lot of times we can treat topically. You're absolutely right, calamine. But most of the time, the symptoms are so severe, right, or so elevated that we don't treat each lesion one by one, right? We actually give medication, oral medication, that will actually go into your bloodstream and help treat, you might say, all at once. Some of the symptoms that you might feel are like burning, tingling, just this incredible itch. Well, most of those cases, basically putting medication on the particular lesion won't do much. You need something way stronger that helps, you might say, shut down a little bit of that nervous system messaging, right? So you have the lesion here, that nerve ending sends a message throughout the whole, nerve channel to goes spinal cord into the brain. So we give medication that basically says, all right, nervous system, take it down a notch. We know you're in some pain, but all right, we got the message. So just let's take the volume down. And that way we're able to treat the whole body instead of just one by one lesion. So yes, it can be treated locally, but in practice, do we? No, not at all. We definitely are generous with pain medication, nerve pain medication specifically, to help treat this, because that's the worst part, right? And we don't want people in agony, specifically when you consider where are the areas that are affected, right? They tend to be very, very sensitive areas. So the pain is exquisite. So definitely want to get more than just topical treatment on this.
It's funny that you mentioned that because more than one person, and I have only one here, but I saw the question more than once. And Gina's one that asked, are the lesions concentrated on one area of the body, or is it could come up on all over?
You can have in several areas. Yeah, that's perfect. You can have in several areas and can include the face, include the topical skin. I mean, the photo we showed you was the hand. Usually areas that actually get the exposure are the ones who will develop the lesions first. Having said that, remember the way it spreads, right? That's why I say, like, we went over it and we touch on it, because if you know how it spreads, you can understand, why some areas are affected, right? Direct contact, right? Skin to skin. So if you were to have sexual relations with someone who actually has it, right? Well, you are going to get that outbreak in that area, right? And that's why we tend to see more in the pelvic area, right? Vaginal area, penis area, rectal area. That's when we tend to see it more, because it's areas that most people overlook, right? It's hard to look in all angles, right? You're not seeing anything. So even if you get the rash, but you don't have those initial symptoms, you are able to spread it without you even knowing it, because you haven't noticed that you have it. So that's why we see more in that area. But to answer your question, no, it's not that, if you touch it and gets exposed to the hands, you're going to have it in the anorectal area. No, not at all. It tends to be more in the areas of exposure. But yeah, depending on your severity, and that's going back to the initial question on immunosuppression or immunocompromised, depends on your immune system as well, right? So you can have it scattered throughout the body, especially if you have a problem with your immune system. So great question.
Okay, so I have two more questions. And Suhei is asking, how long, since you mentioned a couple of the surfaces like towels, sheets, how long is there studies that have shown how long does the virus actually survive on the surface?
Yeah, that's a real tough one, right? We don't have all that information. Um, there are initial studies, just like there were when COVID came out. Unfortunately, it's pretty spread out there, depending on which study you look at. We think it's basically the first 24 hours. We don't think the virus lasts that long. Now, keep in mind a lot of things, right? We have to create an environment that a virus can survive in, and bacteria as well, right? So purely metal surfaces tend to be very low risk. Places like towels, right, which is a biological, a nature component, right, a plant component that usually will be moist. So it has water supply, it has a biological component. Usually, you'll have skin, right? So those areas, obviously, we expect it to last more because it has. If you were to go into the tiniest, right? If we were to take the huge magnifying glass and see the environment, it would be an area where the virus can basically say, ah, cool, I'm not with the person, but you know what? It's not bad here either. I mean, I got skin cells, I got water. I mean, it's humid. I mean, it's not bad. I'm okay. I can live a little longer compared to if we're talking about a copper surface, which we know that copper actually has antimicrobial, antibacterial, antiviral properties. You know, in copper, it won't survive practically, and not even an hour, most probably. So all those things come into play. But I wish I could tell you definitely, you know, hey, you know what? It's 24 hours. No, we don't have that information, unfortunately.
Okay, and then the final question is a lot of people are asking if you boost your immune system, will it help? If you take any, and it's interesting that you actually talked about home remedies because I think all of the ones you mentioned I've heard, even
Uh-huh.
with family members, and I'm like, why, what are you doing? No. But I just wanted to see if wrapping up these questions, what uh supplements, if you're a person that are high risk like you mentioned, what are some things that you can do to keep your immune system in shape, and not just for to help you against monkeypox, but to help you probably health in any other infection, bacterial, other virus. What is something that you may recommend to your patients to stay healthy, and just try to then be live a normal life?
Well done. Well, first let me start by congratulating your audience because the diversity of questions is fascinating, right? And it hasn't been just what is this? It means people are thinking, and I like that. And this last question is actually one of my favorite because it talks about what we can do to prevent, right? How can we actually help ourselves get a better immune system? And this goes above monkeypox, above COVID or any of these. Is just how can you have a better immune system? So there's a couple of things, some that you're gonna like, some that you're not gonna like, depending on what's your preference. But a couple of things. One, sleep. I know we live in a society where it's like gun ho, like we got to do it, super efficiency, all these things. The best thing you can do for your immune system is sleep 7 to 8 hours every day. And I'll give you an example. When you actually get a cold, when you get the flu or anything like that, do you feel the energy? Do you feel like, you know what? You know what I should do? I got COVID. I feel like I should run a marathon. Let me just go run a marathon. Or do you feel like, you know what, man, I just want to go to sleep, right? Well, there's a reason for that. It's actually when you sleep, we say, oh, I rest. Well, wait a second now. Your muscles rest, your conscious brain rests, but your body is not resting. I mean, you are creating memory, you are solidifying synapses in the brain. Your immune system is working like crazy to rebuild. That's why if you sleep basically, or you having a lot of anxiety, you sleep 3, 4, 5 hours for 2, 3 days straight, chances are you're going to get an infection, you're going to get sick. So the number one thing I would say, and most natural, that you don't have to waste any money or you don't have to buy supplements, get some sleep, 7 to 8 hours. Second thing is what you actually put into your body. And we're going to touch about 3 things with this. I want to touch about vitamin D, vitamin C, and actually just the food you eat. So when we talk about vitamin D is actually that you can get supplement, but actually going outside, taking some sunlight, around 15 minutes of sunlight, depending on where you live, you'll actually create vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is very important because we know it's connected to your immune system. That's partly why, most of the cases that we see and the word we have for an upper respiratory tract infection, it basically almost in any language is cold, right? Oh, resfriado, cold, right? So it's usually related to cold. We get less sunlight, we go out less, we get less exposure to sunlight, we decrease the vitamin D, and we know that low levels of vitamin D are associated with a weaker immune system. So whether you want to go outside 15 minutes a day, get sun exposure, limited sunbathing, we don't want you getting skin cancer or anything like that. Vitamin D supplements, anything like that will definitely help. As far as vitamin C goes, vitamin C is an interesting one. Vitamin C, we know that if you use it before you get sick, you definitely do get some protection. If you're already sick, you can double down on vitamin C. And when we do these big studies, they really don't show any improvement. Actually, you can develop side effects to the vitamin C too much. So you can take it as a supplement, but obviously that leads to the third part, which is it's better to basically get all these things the natural way. And the reason for that is when you look at a multivitamin, a lot of times you're going to say, oh, this has 1,000% of the vitamin C that I need. This is amazing. Well, I can let you know right now, an all-time exclusive, that the United States has the most expensive urine in the world because we pee all of this crap out, right? So all these vitamins that you're taking, like 1,000%, yeah, you're wasting your money, you're peeing all that out. Now we see this, and I'll give you a perfect example is iron. When we take iron tablets, right? So if any of our viewers have anemia and they've been prescribed, or you've been pregnant and you've been prescribed iron, you'll notice that usually the dose is 325 milligrams. The reality is what you really are absorbing is around 60 to 70, right? Now, if you were to eat certain foods that have that same dose of iron, your body is able to absorb 70 to 80% of that, right? So what we eat is very important, and what we don't eat is as well. We do know that, for example, dairy products and meat products are actually pro-inflammatory, right? So we know that if you are consuming high levels of milk, cheese, chicken, fish, beef, well, you already have a pro-inflammatory reaction in your body. So being sick is also inflammatory. And that's why in little kids, for example, when they have the cold, that's been studied a lot. One of the recommendations is when your child has a cold, get them off dairy, right? Because we know it produces more mucus. So what you eat, what you don't eat, both are extremely important. So that's what you can do. Get some sleep, eat the right things, vitamin D. And the last one, once again, you may not like it, is actually exercise. We know that exercise increases the immune system. Now, I want to be very clear because, depending where you go on YouTube and stuff, you're going to find some fanatics that are like, gym. Listen, 30 minutes of exercise, and we're talking about speed walking or walking where you feel like if I walk faster, I'm going to have to start jogging. That is good enough. We already see huge improvements with that. And a beautiful thing that happens with that is that a lot of times you'll start losing weight. And we know that 3 to 5% of weight loss, if you are obese or overweight, already has health benefits that help your immune system as well. So those are simple things that you can do that you don't have to really be too, spending a lot of money or anything like that to get these done. That will definitely help you prevent getting infections as easy. But let me touch on one last thing, because when we talk about infections, there's actually something that we might say is the infectious dose, right? And what that means is that you can get exposed to a virus, to a bacteria, and there's a threshold, right? So let's say you're exposed to monkeypox, but you didn't get enough virus in you or enough exposure to cross that threshold. That means that honestly, your body basically sees it, they can deal with it, no problem, right? And you never get the infection. If you get enough exposure, you get that inoculation dose or that infectious dose, now we actually get the infection in our body. Now, when you eat right, you sleep 7 to 8 hours, you're getting enough vitamin D, you're not eating the stuff you shouldn't eat. What we do is not that we're immune, we just bring that threshold up a little bit more. So that means that if you get exposed to a little bit higher doses, you're still good. Your immune system, man, that army is ready to go. They're not drunk on the corner shooting themselves. No, they're actually focused on what they have to do. So those are simple things that you can do that really help. They may not be exciting. They may not be the next thing on YouTube, or they may not be the one that, oh my God, this is what I can sell to my friends. And they seem very boring, right? Just get some sleep, eat right, do exercise, but they work. They are the things that work. And that's the best thing you can do, honestly, right now.
That's actually great suggestions, because here in the Valley, there is a high incidence of low vitamin D.
Yep.
There is a high incidence on obesity, which brings then diabetes and an array of more complications. So thank you so much, Dr. Gavala, for joining us. Thank all of our viewers, the students, for the questions. And as I said, please like our YouTube page and join us in November for our next talk. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, anytime.